Humanitarian interests. In this lesson, we'll look at humanitarian interests, what they are, why the United States is interested in them, what the United States does to promote them, and we'll also look at a current event that shows humanitarian interests in action. So our objectives are to understand the meaning of humanitarian national interests when it comes to foreign policy and be able to describe types of foreign policy used. Our central questions are: what are human rights? What types of foreign policy tools does the United States use? And why is foreign policy important? This lesson will focus mainly on what it means to have human rights. What are the rights that we have just because we're human beings, and how does the United States try and make sure that people around the world have those rights? So what are human rights? Human rights are the rights that all people have by virtue of being human beings. So they're things that you have just because you're a human being. Human rights are defined internationally, nationally, and locally by various lawmaking bodies. That just means that what human rights actually are determined by multiple things, and we'll look at an example of that on the next slide. We have humanitarian interests attached to foreign policy as well. This includes protecting and upholding human rights around the world. So that means that when the United States sees places that aren't guaranteeing people human rights or are mistreating people in some way, the United States takes an interest in that. That's called being a humanitarian, which is a person seeking to promote human welfare or make sure that people are being treated fairly and in the right way according to their human rights. So what are human rights? These aren't the only ones, but in 1948, an organization called the United Nations, which is like a bunch of countries that agreed to kind of have this organization where they meet and just talk about things that are going on in the world. They came up with this thing called the Declaration of Human Rights, and it had very basically what they thought were human rights, rights that you get just because you're a human being. And they are equality in rights, meaning that all people should have the same rights, no matter who you are or what you look like. You have the right to life. All people should be allowed to live, just meaning that you can't be killed just because. Freedom from slavery. No person should be forced to work without fair pay and conditions. The right to a fair trial. People should be able to defend themselves if they are accused of something wrong, and there should be a fair trial. And freedom of expression. People should be able to say what they want as long as it does not go against the law or another human right or hurt somebody in some way. So those are the five that they kind of came up with. There was way more to it than that, but these are the main things that they saw as the main rights that we have just because we're human beings. Are there any other ones? There's been some stuff added in. I'll go through them real quick. Genocide was made illegal and punishable by the United States. Genocide is when a large group of people are killed for some kind of reason, or no reason at all. But the reason could be maybe because they're a certain skin color, they're a certain religion, or a certain ethnic group. And unfortunately, that has happened a lot in the history of the world. So genocide was made illegal by this group. Freedom from racial discrimination, freedom from discrimination against women, refugee protection. Remember, a refugee is a person that leaves their home because of something violent that was going on in their area. So protecting refugees and people that flee these areas is another part of human rights. Torture was made illegal and punishable. Rights for disabled persons and rights for children, of all things that have been discussed by the United Nations as human rights. So let's look at an example of where all this is going on in today's world. There's a country called Syria. It's in the Middle East. Syrian President Assad, he rose to power after his father died, but not everyone's happy that he's in power. President Assad's regime has begun to use heavy weapons in residential areas, trapping civilians in the crossfire. So there's a lot of little groups, rebel groups, that don't like the president, and they're kind of trying to get rid of him. The president doesn't want to go, so the president's using his military to try and stop these rebel groups. Problem with that is these fights are happening in places where just regular people live. So the regular people that live in these areas are being hurt. The regime did not make efforts to spare civilians to help them or protect them in any way, and has not shown concern for civilians who are displaced. There has been a grave abuse of power. So the government in Syria is trying to get rid of these rebels that they don't like, but they're not taking into account or considering that they're actually hurting their own people. by trying to get rid of these rebels. They're just hurting innocent people that just happen to live in these areas. So beginning in 2011, many different political and military groups are fighting for control of Syria in a civil war. Those are the rebel groups that we discussed. They're trying to overthrow the regime, and they're trying to affirm national unity and protect national independence. These rebel groups have said that they kind of want to change things. The conflict's getting to be so big that it's starting to spill over, get into other countries such as Jordan and Lebanon that are nearby. And a lot of people are leaving Syria, we call them refugees, remember, because of what's going on in Syria. It's getting too dangerous, so they're trying to go to other countries. So now what's going on in Syria is affecting other countries nearby. So who's trying to fix this? All this stuff that's going on in Syria. You have NGOs, remember we've learned about those in the past. There's NGOs that are in there trying to monitor elections and political trials. They're supposed to be able to investigate human rights and conditions. So there's NGOs that are working in Syria to try and help people that live there in some way. There's been military action. The United States is a part of that. They've led a coalition, which is like a group of countries, in airstrikes in Syria and Iraq to try and stop certain people. There's been diplomacy. There's been UN conferences in Switzerland to form a transitional governing body. That means they're trying to come up with a group to try and just help the people in Syria have a stable government. And there's also been a series of internationally backed agreements. So they're trying to make treaties and agreements to try and fix things that are going on in Syria as well. Now, all of this is still going on. It's an evolving thing and a current thing, and it's not something that just can be fixed very quickly. But the focus of the United States in all of this is the people of Syria and trying to establish the protection of human rights within that country. That is the national interest of the United States, to promote human rights. So make sure you join us for a live class this week. If you have questions, concerns, or need help with this lesson or anything else, please feel free to contact us. Our information is there. If not, good luck.